Here's a question nobody asks you. If your life were a movie right now, not a highlight reel, not your Instagram, the actual unedited footage of your days, what genre would it be?
Because for a lot of people, if they're honest, it's not a thriller. It's not a romance. It's not even a decent drama.
It's a Tuesday, just a long, forgettable Tuesday that somehow keeps repeating.
And that's exactly what we're digging into today, because 2026 is not over. The year still has enough runway left for something real to happen, if you're willing to have an honest conversation with yourself about why you're still standing in the same spot.
We're going to talk about comfort zones that slowly eat you alive, what rock bottom actually teaches you, and the strange, quiet way that ordinary people engineer extraordinary comebacks. By the time we're done, you'll have something more useful than motivation. You'll have a framework.
Okay, so before we get into the deep stuff, Marcus, I want to try something. I want you to think about your life right now, your real life, and give it a score, 1 to 10. But here's the rule. You cannot say 7.
Oh, that's cruel.
I know, because 7 is the hiding place. 7 means, I don't want to examine this too closely. 7 means life is survivable and you've made peace with that.
You're right, though. When you take 7 off the table, suddenly you have to actually think. Like, am I genuinely doing well? Or am I just telling myself I am?
Exactly. So what's your number?
Honestly, 5.5, maybe a 6 on a generous day.
And why?
Because I know I'm not in crisis, but I also know I'm not fully alive, if that makes sense. I'm showing up for life. I'm not really living it yet.
I think that's the most honest thing you've said on this show. And I think if a lot of people listening right now really sat with that question, they'd land somewhere in that same range. Not because their lives are disasters, but because they can feel the gap between who they are and who they know they could be.
So how does someone end up there? How does a person who had real dreams end up living a 5.5 life without ever deciding to?
That's the thing. They didn't decide. That's the whole point. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, you know what? Today, I'm going to commit to mediocrity. I'm going to stop growing. I'm going to let my potential quietly expire.
But somehow that's what happens.
Because it doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in 1,000 tiny ones. You skip the workout once because you're tired. You postpone the conversation because it feels risky. You don't apply for the job because you don't feel ready yet. And each of those choices feels completely reasonable in the moment. You're being kind to yourself. You're being realistic.
But compound those choices over a year, over 2 years, and suddenly you look up and realize, wait, I've been drifting. I didn't choose this life. I just stopped resisting it.
And the dangerous thing about drifting is that it's comfortable. You don't feel it happening. The water's warm, and by the time you notice you've floated miles from shore, you're exhausted thinking about swimming back.
So what wakes someone up from that drift?
Sometimes it's a number. Sometimes it's a question you can't stop hearing. Sometimes it's December. You look at your calendar, you look at who you were in January, and you feel this specific kind of quiet grief, not for anything that happened to you, but for everything you chose not to do.
And that's the moment. That's the one. Stay with me here because this is important. Most people think the enemy is failure. That's why they don't take risks. They're scared of falling short, of embarrassing themselves, of looking like they tried and didn't make it.
But here's the part nobody talks about. Playing it safe doesn't protect you from failure. It just changes what kind of failure you're signing up for.
Explain that.
If you take the risk and it doesn't work, yes, that hurts. You fall short of the goal. You feel the disappointment. But you also learn something. You get data. You get stronger. You get a better map for next time.
But if you play it safe...
If you play it safe, you avoid the sting. But slowly, quietly, you become what we'd call complacent. And complacency is sneaky because it doesn't feel like failure. It feels like stability. It feels like wisdom, even. I'm being realistic. I'm not one of those people who chases impossible dreams.
Until you realize that the impossible dream was actually just your life. The life you were built for, and you talked yourself out of it because you didn't want to risk a little embarrassment.
That's the real cost of playing safe. Not that you lose, but that you slowly forget you were ever supposed to play.
Okay, But what do you do when you've been playing safe for so long that you don't even know what you want anymore? When the drift has gone on so long that you've lost your direction?
Then we need to talk about the part of this conversation that nobody wants to have.
Because this is where we get real. We've been talking about drifting, about playing safe, about that quiet gap between the life you're living and the life you wanted. But there's a deeper layer. And I promise, if you've been hanging in there, what's coming next is the part that actually changes things.
Sometimes the drift doesn't end gently. Sometimes you don't just notice you're off course. Sometimes the ship hits something.
Rock bottom.
Yeah, and rock bottom looks different for everyone. For some people, it's a health scare, a relationship that falls apart, a job that vanishes, a number on a scale, or a bank statement that you can't look away from. For others, it's quieter, just a moment alone at 2 a.m. where you look at your ceiling and think, is this actually it? Is this my life?
And when you're in that place, the advice you usually get is terrible. Stay positive. Everything happens for a reason. Things will get better.
Which is not wrong exactly, but it's like telling someone whose leg is broken to just keep dancing.
What actually helps when you've hit that lowest point is understanding what rock bottom is actually for. Because it's not punishment, it's data. It's the universe or life or whatever you believe in telling you in the clearest possible way, the old strategy isn't working.
The version of you that got you here cannot be the version of you that gets you out.
And that's terrifying because it means change, real change, not a new habit or a better morning routine, a different relationship with who you are and what you're doing here.
But here's the thing about rock bottom that most people miss. It removes all the noise. When everything falls apart, all the performances disappear. The masks come off, and for the first time in maybe years, you get to see clearly what actually matters to you and who actually shows up.
The people who answer at 2 a.m., not the ones who liked your success photos.
Exactly, and that clarity, as painful as it is to earn it, is genuinely valuable. You can build something real on it.
So let's say someone is ready. They've woken up from the drift or they've survived the rock bottom and they want to actually change direction. Where do they start?
They start by accepting one uncomfortable truth. They're going to fall again. The comeback is not a clean, straight line upward. It's messy, it's non-linear. You'll have weeks where you feel unstoppable and weeks where you feel like you've lost everything you gained.
But here's the distinction that matters. When you fall, which direction do you fall?
That's the whole thing. Most people, when they stumble, fall backward, back into the old story. See, I knew I couldn't do it. I knew I wasn't built for this. And they retreat to the small life, because at least there it's familiar.
But falling forward is different. Falling forward means you hit the ground, you feel the full weight of the failure, and then you ask, what can I learn from exactly this moment? What did I find out about myself that I didn't know before?
Because maybe you tried speaking up in a meeting and it came out wrong, you can fall backward into permanent silence. Or you can fall forward and say, okay, now I know what not to do. Now I know how I actually sound when I'm nervous. Next time, I'll prepare differently.
The ground is the same. What you do on it is everything. And if you keep falling forward consistently, patiently, even when it's embarrassing, something happens that's hard to explain until you've experienced it. The falls get shorter. Not because life gets easier, because you get better at getting up. But I want to name something that I think is the real reason people don't change. Even when they know all of this, even when they understand the drift, the complacency, the falling forward concept, there's still something that holds them back.
And what is it?
They're living for an audience. They're measuring their comeback by whether it's visible enough to impress other people. And because a real comeback is mostly invisible, it's the 6 a.m. choice no one sees, the email sent to one person, the 10 minutes of work when your brain wants to quit. They underestimate it. They think nothing is changing because nothing is showing.
So the progress gets obscured by comparison. You're looking at someone else's highlight reel while you're in the middle of your own behind the scenes.
And that's when people give up. Not at rock bottom, not when it's hard. They give up in the quiet middle, when it feels like nothing is moving, when the work is invisible and the results aren't dramatic yet.
That is the most dangerous moment because everything meaningful is built in that middle stretch. Every version of yourself that you're proud of was forged there in the period where it didn't look like anything was working.
So I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually sit with it before we move on. Think about the person you most want to become by the end of this year. Not the Instagram version, the real version. The version that can look back in December and feel something other than disappointment.
What would that person have done differently this week?
Not this year, this week. Because the gap between who you are and who you want to be isn't bridged in some dramatic transformation. It's bridged in the next decision, and the one after that.
Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is send one email you've been avoiding for 3 weeks, or finish one page, or say one honest thing to one person, or show up to something even though you're scared.
Because here's what nobody tells you about purpose. You don't find it sitting still. You find it in motion. You find it when you're doing the thing, even imperfectly, and you discover what lights up inside you and what doesn't.
The ideas that have been sitting in a waiting room in your head, the projects, the conversations, the risks you keep deferring, they don't expire quietly. They become weight, and carrying them without acting on them costs you more energy than actually trying would.
So here's where we land. You are not too late. The year is not over, and your story, the real one, is not the version that's been running on autopilot.
The comeback doesn't look like a movie moment. It doesn't start with a dramatic speech or a perfect plan. It starts with an honest number, a real look at where you actually are versus where you pretend to be.
It starts with choosing to fall forward instead of back, with building something true in the invisible middle, even when nobody's watching.
With breaking out of the pattern, the one where you have the big idea, the big excitement, and then somehow end up back at square one, and just doing one small, real thing instead.
Because every comeback in history, every person who rose from the ashes of a version of themselves that stopped working, did it the same way. Not in one brave moment, in 1,000 ordinary ones that nobody else saw.
Your 2026 comeback doesn't need to look impressive. It just needs to be honest.
If something in this conversation landed for you, we'd love to know. Drop your number in the comments, 1 to 10, no 7s, and one honest word for how this year has felt so far. We read every single one.
And if you know someone who's been in the quiet drift who needs this conversation more than they need another productivity hack, you already know what to do.
We'll see you in the next one.